There is perhaps no symbol more characteristic of the strength of imperial Rome than the majesty of its architecture. The Roman Empire at its height dominated 3 continents, 20 races, and more than 500 great cities. And once they conquered, they built. Roman-style architecture can be found from Italy to Spain, France to Asia Minor, Africa to the Black Sea. The cities were all built in the same grand style: columns, porticos, markets, temples, basilicas. The Roman Empire unified the entire Mediterranean basin, encompassing lands where many civilizations had flowered, uniting them into one sole civilization, with the same laws, the same way of life, the same customs. A single great multi-ethnic population that did not discriminate against its subjects for the color of their skin, and which had as emperor Italians, Europeans, Africans, and Arabs. To understand how Rome could build such a vast empire and then govern it for almost 1,000 years, we will journey to the extreme outskirts of the Roman Empire at the time of its greatest expansion and learn the secrets that archaeology has uncovered for us. Rome was founded, according to legend, by Romulus in 753 BC. It began its expansion almost immediately, first conquering the lands of the Italian peoples, and then extending its domain until an empire was created that stretched from the Atlantic coasts of Iberia all the way to the Euphrates River. Historians date the fall of the Western Roman Empire to 476 AD, meaning that the history of this city and its dominion over the world spanned an entire millennium. How was it able to last so long? The answer is, Rome not only conquered lands, it adopted them, blending the customs and habits of various civilizations with the best that Rome had to offer. In Vaison-la-Romaine, France, once a Roman province known as Gaul, archaeologists uncovered this paved road bordered by impressive buildings. At its entryways, the researchers noticed some strange grooves. What were they for? When presented with a puzzle like this, archaeologists often find important clues in ancient architectural writings, preserved by medieval scribes. In the case of Vaison-la-Romaine, the mystery was solved. The grooves in the thresholds supported wooden tables where merchants displayed their goods. By positioning the tables along the roadway, merchants enjoyed maximum visibility for their products and therefore had more success. This emphasis on marketing and commerce was one of the reasons why the empire remained vital for so long. Wherever the Romans arrived, weapons were laid down eventually, and the Pax Romana, or Roman peace, took their place. Within this context of renewed stability, business was able to thrive. Eventually, after Rome had invaded and inhabited a new land, it would take the best soldiers of that country and incorporate them into its own army. The best of these recruits would have come from wealthy families. They were usually better educated and trained, with natural aspirations to rise through the system of their new ruling government. If they succeeded in battle and the political aspects of war, they might have the chance to become senator, one of the highest and wealthiest positions in the empire. A military career was the fastest route to furthering one's career. Of course, the new soldiers had to start at the bottom. They would be sent to battles in the easternmost borders of the empire, where Emperor Trajan was fighting the formidable Parni, the heirs of the Persians. From France, they would embark with a small military fleet on a voyage from Massilia, now Marseille, to Sicily, and forced to fight pirates along the way. From Sicily, the voyage would continue to the Orient, following the fastest and safest route possible. This meant following the coastline and only crossing open sea where necessary. The fleet would thread its way across the Aegean through the Peloponnesus to reach the port of Laodicea in Syria. Warships at that time were a lot different than merchant ships. This boat is called a trireme. We know how it looked because of information from relics recovered by marine archaeologists. They discovered that in order to be able to make quick maneuvers in battle and ram the enemy, warships were propelled by several layers of oarsmen. Merchant ships, on the other hand, used sails and had no oars. Warships were classified by the number and arrangement of oarsmen. The trireme had 3 tiers of oars, and each oar was manned by 2 oarsmen. It was a lightweight fighting ship, about 115 feet long, and perfect for hunting pirates because it was fast and agile. Naval soldiers manned the ship together with the oarsmen and were there to board enemy ships. Each trireme had a crew of about 300 oarsmen and 100 naval soldiers. To rid the vast waters of the Mediterranean and the Aegean of pirates, the fleet would often give chase, sometimes for hundreds of miles, to catch its enemy. Once caught, the tactic was not to board the enemy ship and engage in hand-to-hand combat, but to sink it, either by ramming it or hitting it with catapult fire. A ship positioned broadside exposed itself to a greater risk of being rammed and sunk than its attacker, but that position offered advantages for the use of its catapult. This is because the rolling waves had 2 different effects on the arc of the projectiles. The defending ship catapult, positioned perpendicular to the main axis, hurled projectiles that fell inside an elongated ellipse, a form which corresponded perfectly to the shape and position of the attacking ship. The attacking ship, on the other hand, had its catapult aligned with its main axis, and its projectiles tended to fall within a circle that encompassed only a minimal part of the target ship. Oftentimes, the attacker's missiles missed their target, and the tides of battle would shift. A soldier's life was not all war. Roman culture demanded a certain refinement and taste among its subjects. This theater in Tyndaris is on the northeast coast of Sicily, overlooking the sea, where many voyagers and soldiers stopped on their journeys. What is both striking and intriguing about this structure is not so much its architecture or finishings, but rather its location. It is stunning, but it lacks a logical explanation. Having a theater exposed to the sea winds and the full sun, since the shows were offered during the daytime, seemed to be a very questionable choice. Other theaters, such as the very steep one in Pergamum, Turkey, had sweeping horizons to look out onto. That was what Hellenic tastes demanded. Every architectural work had to have something magnificent about it. The Tyndaris Theater, like much of the city, was not actually built by the Romans, but rather by the Greeks several centuries earlier during the Hellenistic era. The Romans simply absorbed it into their empire. One of the reasons for the size and strength of the Roman Empire was its assimilation of Greek culture, which was imitated and developed even further, as in the art of mosaics, and then spread throughout the empire. In the interior of Sicily was a flourishing city, Morgantina. Sumptuous dwellings adorned with splendid mosaics testify to its wealth. One of the ways it demonstrated its prosperity was the gracious hospitality offered to strangers. We see evidence in this mosaic, which contains the Greek phrase, "be well," which may be taken as a sort of welcome. All citizens of the empire were equal. People and ideas were allowed to circulate freely, as were goods. The governor of the island, as well as its year-round inhabitants, would extend the celebrated Roman hospitality to all visitors, offering wine, meat, and all the produce of the fertile Sicilian soil, part of the Italian terra firma, a land that Virgil called an earthly paradise, mighty mother of crops and mother of men. Sometimes an army's mission was not of war, but of peace. On the Greek island of Santorini was an early settlement called Thera. Thera was located in an area that was always at risk for earthquakes. Half of the island disappeared into the sea in the 2nd millennium BC. The archaeological remains of Thera show that the city was rebuilt several times because it was hit by an earthquake more than once. The earthquakes would seriously damage public and private buildings, and on occasion, the Roman army would be assigned to carry out civil engineering projects, digging wells, clearing roads, restoring hygiene. An army officer could distinguish himself further by performing these public duties in a successful fashion. Moving further east, toward the outer reaches of the empire, we entered Jordan. Archaeologists working during the last century uncovered a beautiful city, Gerasa. They were quite puzzled to find numerous drain covers like this one, bearing the engraved image of a dolphin. This animal is clearly associated with the sea, although Gerasa was surrounded by desert and far from the coast. What mysterious meaning did this hide? Excavation work revealed a very rich city over the course of decades and offered clues to archaeologists as to what relationship Gerasa might have had with water. One of the city's most important monuments is the Nymphaeum, an impressively decorated fountain. These channels in the paving stones served to carry away the water. The city was thus laced with small rivulets of water. A sensational discovery emerged from the study of the grand colonnade that crossed the city. At the tops of the columns, encased in the architraves, there were water conduits. Gerasa had a complex water distribution system. The water that filled the streams during the rainy season was diverted, collected, and conveyed all around the city, where it was used ostentatiously before draining off along the various channels. This system was certainly wasteful, but that is precisely why it was a source of pride to the city. With its ample supply of water and its monuments, including this temple dedicated to Zeus built in a panoramic position atop 3 terraces, Gerasa projected an image of beauty and hospitality as befitted its status as one of the ancient world's most important marketplaces. The city was at the eastern border of the Roman Empire, an area of intense commercial traffic between the Mediterranean to the west and India and China to the east. Gerasa had to compete for commerce with other cities in the same zone, such as Palmyra and Petra, and hence had to offer a wide range of quality services and entertainment, as seen in its 2 theaters, its mineral baths, and the stadium. Its hospitality is highlighted by this magnificent oval plaza, for which Gerasa is world famous. The oval plaza of Gerasa is a symbol of the Roman Empire. An imposing colonnaded avenue penetrates the city and ends in this picturesque plaza. It is clear that the most beautiful and important cities of the empire, even the more distant ones like Gerasa, owed their stature to the excellent routes connecting them. The plaza, or the forum, as the Romans liked to call the city's most important meeting place, was always the end point of a road. This oval plaza stands as a testament to the most important reason for the survival of the Roman Empire: its road system. The efficiency of these road networks could be admired today. There were postal stations, armed guards, constant upkeep of the surface, and over 75,000 miles of roads. Gerasa was the eastern outpost of the empire. From here, Roman soldiers would travel through dunes across a boundless desert and encounter a culture and civilization unlike anything they had ever known. The caustic people who lived in this area between the Euphrates and the Indus rivers made even Romans tremble. This was the land of the Parni, the heirs of the Persians. The Romans would be forced to call upon their formidable battle tactics to defeat this bellicose enemy. There would be 5 or 6 tribunes in command of several divisions. The tribunes would report to a legate of the emperor, the top commander of the legion. Under the tribunes were the centurions, an elite force of men who commanded the centuries, groups of 100 soldiers. When engaging the Parni on the battlefield, the Romans would utilize their well-established military techniques. The cavalry would be deployed along the flanks. In the center, facing the enemy army, there would be 4 rows of infantry, with the centuries in a staggered array to close any gaps. The first to attack were the Velites, a light force that carried out swift strikes and then took refuge behind the lines. Next, the Lancers advanced, hurling their javelins and then engaging in hand-to-hand combat before retreating. And then it was the turn of the Princeps, and lastly, the Triarii, armed with lance and sword. The attacks continued in the same order repeatedly until all 4 lines, flanked by the cavalry, launched the final assault. If they won the first battle, the Romans would face a much more arduous challenge: the siege of a city. The army would camp about half a mile from the walls and would set these ominous war machines, efficient and effective catapults, upon pedestals. Catapults could shoot arrows, or, when necessary, rocks. When the army laid siege to a city, they used rocks as missiles to break openings in the walls so that the army could invade. The rocks would need to hit the same point again and again. This was achieved by loading the catapult with projectiles of the same weight after carrying out several launch tests and choosing the proper position in which to set the machine. The rocks weighed up to 175 pounds and had a maximum range of 700 yards. In order to launch them at high speed toward the adversary's walls, the rocks were placed in a sack at the center of a rope tied to each of the arms of a bow, held in tension by a system of twisted ropes. A winch drew back the rope, which would then snap forward and hurl the projectile when the ring attached to the sack was released. Along with the catapult bombardment, the Romans would use other war machines as well. The tower was one of their strongest assault weapons. Its sides were closed, but could be opened at different levels when needed. On the intermediate floors, there were catapults armed with arrows and rocks. On the upper floors, there were soldiers ready to make the assault, when the towers were next to the enemy walls. On the bottom floor, there was the battering ram. When the wall had been breached, the tribune would give the signal to his centurions to attack and make their victorious entrance into the city. With Trajan's victory over the Parni, the Roman Empire reached its greatest expansion. A well-decorated officer could return home and follow the cursus honorum, the way of honor, a strictly regimented Roman ladder of promotion. With the right battle honors, they could win a much-desired senatorial appointment and sit in on the empire's most important assembly. Roman senators were fighters too, but in a different way. They would use weapons of diplomacy, equitable application of law, and wise economic and political administration to maintain the stability of all that the army had achieved. The empire was an immense domain that encompassed the entire known world at the time. The legacy was one of the most powerful in world history. While excavating in North Africa, archaeologists found a large number of incredible monuments, as well as enormous quantities of simple utensils, such as jars, pots, and farming tools. It suggested that the desert that we see now must have then set much farther back. Ancient travel books speak of vast expanses of fertile lands, irrigated by copious waterways, that stretched between the desert and the coast in the present-day territories of Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. Thanks to its flourishing agriculture, North Africa enjoyed a period of great prosperity between the 1st and the 4th centuries AD, making fortunes for many men. Come with us as we explore this rich and tenacious civilization, uncovering fascinating cities and luxurious villas, and the way of life of a people who lived in a unique time. In Africa, the Roman Empire stretched from modern-day Morocco to Egypt. Verdant farming lands were located in Mauritania Tingitana, in what is now Morocco, Numidia and Mauritania Chassasorense, corresponding to present-day Algeria, and proconsular Africa in modern Tunisia. This ancient inscription was found in Mokhtar in Tunisia. It recounts the story of a life at that time. I was born into a poor family and lived by cultivating my fields from the day I was born. Neither my land nor I ever knew a moment's rest. Later, I left my village and worked for others for 12 years, sowing crops under the burning sun. Then I became the head of a team of harvesters and headed groups of farm laborers for 11 years. I saved enough money to become the owner of a house and a farm. Today, I live a life of comfort, and reaping the benefits of my way of life, I have also carved out a career in public administration. From a humble peasant, I have risen to become supreme magistrate. Men, learn to live an honest life. He who lives without cheating others merits to die covered in honors. The inscription became famous as a historical treatise of the period. It showed how one could rise up the social ladder and construct a fortune out of nothing. You only needed dreams and the energies to achieve them. In those days, there were millions of olive trees where now there are only desert sands. Olive oil was used in cooking, as a detergent, and as a toner while bathing. Olive oil was also used to provide fuel for lamps, which burned up huge quantities of it. It was here in North Africa that Roman colonists produced most of the olive oil consumed in Rome, earning a great deal of money and managing to prosper despite high taxes and the encroaching desert. Thermal baths and pools were built in great public complexes that varied in the level of luxury offered. 6 were found in the archaeological site of Banassa in Morocco. With further excavations, archaeologists found that the city also contained several oil presses, mills, and warehouses. Numerous villas were found in the countryside around Banassa, ancient versions of modern farmhouses. It was the perfect farming business of ancient times. The farms produced the olives, the oil presses turned them into oil, and the oil was then sent off to the Italian markets. The thermal baths satisfied the needs of landowners, but also of simple peasants and laborers who wanted to enjoy themselves in the city, relaxing, recovering from their hard work, and finding refuge from the great African heat. Like many laborers today, farm workers had to be migratory, to go where the work was. This could mean lands far away, where the economy was stronger. The workers would have traveled in a caravan covering great distances. One popular destination was proconsular Africa, modern-day Tunisia. One of the most important cities of the time was located here, Thesdrus, now called El-Djem. The houses here were built on a terrace system and whitewashed to reflect the rays of the sun, not unlike houses in the city today. But the magnificence of the city's architecture was the amphitheatre of Thesdrus, built in 230 AD. Excluding the Colosseum, the mother of all amphitheatres, the construction in Thesdrus was second only to the amphitheatre in Capua. It is the biggest building in the Roman Empire to be erected beyond the borders of Italy. The main axis measured 485 feet. The slightly shorter axis was 400 feet, forming an almost circular ellipsis. The internal arena covered an area of 213 feet by 128 feet. The amphitheater could seat 40,000 people, and the most frequent entertainment was gladiator contests. However, despite the comfort provided by awnings, the building did not boast the lavish decorations and pomposity of the Colosseum. The arches, though they rose up to a height of over 131 feet, do not have the breadth of the Roman Colosseum. They are narrower and therefore less visually impressive. This is due to the fact that the rather brittle local African stone was not strong enough to bear the weight of wider arches. This is why the amphitheater in Thesdrus rose up over 3 orders of austere arches, which were adorned with composite Corinthian columns. From an architectural point of view, This model breaks with the Italian design by its essentiality. There are fewer cornices and columns, and the facades are solid. Indeed, the African style is simply not as rich. On the other hand, African public works could not draw on Roman tax revenues. The governor of Africa, Gordianus, built this colossus in the 3rd century AD in what amounted to a direct challenge to Rome. He was actually encouraging a revolt against the exorbitant taxes imposed by Rome. He was strategizing from a position of strength. In the later stages, the Roman Empire had become weak and unproductive, and was able to live in luxury only due to the taxes it collected from the provinces. On the other hand, the provinces forged ahead, being highly productive, their political and economic importance on the ascent. They began to provide emperors, such as the African Septimius Severus and his son Caracalla. Money can indeed bring power, and the olive plantations here pushed many to the top of Rome's social structure. In another area of Tunisia, archaeologists brushed away the desert sands to discover once again an example of the importance of entertainment in ancient cultures. They found rows of steps, part of which were wide and comfortable, while others were shallower, with each category kept strictly separated from the other. Eventually, it became clear that they formed part of the theater of Bulla Regia, which dates back to the 2nd century AD. The wider and more comfortable steps were reserved for the wealthy and famous, while the common people were relegated to the narrow steps. Bulla Regia was a provincial city compared to the capital Thesdrus. Not surprisingly, its economy was heavily oriented in the olive trade. The abundant farmland around the city made it an attractive settlement for those wanting to make their money in agriculture. The theater was an ideal place for making important contacts. After the show, you could befriend some of the most influential people in the city by going down to the official reception rooms. One puzzling factor for archaeologists was, why did a city with such a large theater have such a relatively small urban center with modest buildings? And where were the houses of the rich and the nobility? A find that helped shed light on this question was this mosaic portraying Venus with Cupid astride a dolphin. It is the pride of Bulla Regia, and one of the most beautiful examples of African mosaic art. But this discovery also spawned a mystery. In spite of the fact that it was exquisitely made, the mosaic was found in the basement of a simple dwelling that seemed completely lacking in prestige. Solving this enigma led to the discovery of a building type that is totally unique of its kind. The dwellings here that date back to the 3rd century AD have a relatively simple upper floor and a luxurious and ornate basement that was dug 16 feet into the ground so occupants could escape the African heat. Wealthy families would stay here during the day, and then in the evening, when it was cooler, they would go to the upper floors. This is an example of a typical residence dating from the Imperial Age, containing about 10 rooms and belonging, in all probability, to a senator who would have lived here with his family and numerous servants. The part of the house seen from the outside could be as large as 8,000 square feet, set around this peristyle, the largest colonnade in the house. This staircase led to the lower floor. This is where the most luxurious and richly decorated part of the house was located, including sumptuous guest rooms. During excavation work, it was discovered that the cool temperature of the basement was not due solely to its depth. The Romans applied an absolutely innovative technique here that can be compared to modern thermal insulation. These cross vaults have an air chamber that separates them from the burning floors overhead. The centering was not made out of wood, as this would have been a scarce material here in Africa, but rather out of clay, more precisely, by using interlocking earthenware pipes that were held in place between the grout and the floor. Since these grand, cool houses were looked upon as palatial refuges, the owners might invite prestigious guests to join them there in magnificent banquets, where they would seek support for some political measure they were backing. Probably the most important room in the house was the triclinium, though you might think it was some kind of bordello, with its luxurious furnishings and exquisite mosaics and couches that looked invitingly sensual. It was actually the dining room. Guests would eat lying on one side around a lavishly set table. The feasts of the African aristocracy were something to behold. This is the account of Apuleius, a Numidian writer. In the triclinium, I found a large number of guests, the cream of the city's aristocracy. Sumptuously laid tables gleaming with cedar and ivory, couches covered with fabrics interwoven with gold, curly-headed youths offering vintage wines and chalices studded in precious stones. You could find everything here, even the impossible. Uncovering fascinating facts of ancient civilizations is one of the marvelous rewards of being an archaeologist. There's a lot that we've discovered, and a lot more still to come. Archaeology does not concern itself only with monumental works such as temples, amphitheaters, and tombs. Ben Franklin coined the phrase, "Man is a tool-making animal." Archaeologists must go beyond the major constructions and analyze commonly used materials in order to give us the wealth of knowledge that we have today. Here is an oil press, a perfectly preserved millstone for oil that was unearthed in Volubilis, capital of ancient Mauritania, near present-day Morocco. Thanks to similar finds, museums such as the Museum of Roman Civilization in Rome have been able to construct faithful reproductions of ancient tools and recreate long-lost trades. Along with writings from the era, archaeologists have been able to ascertain the importance of olive oil trade and marketing, and from there to see how oil brought money, and money brought power. This bronze statue was also unearthed in Volubilis. It is 3 feet in length, weighs more than 35 pounds, and is richly decorated. Yet it is simply one fold on a cloak. Archaeologists found it at the base of this monumental arch and linked it to one of the biggest bronze statues that ever existed, Emperor Caracalla riding on a chariot, which they knew was set on top of an arch in ancient times. The arch was the entry point to the city. You would enter the city traveling along the Decumanus, which was lined with shops and teeming with traffic and activity. Volubilis was the central administrative city for this part of Roman Africa, responsible for producing grain and exporting it to Rome. The Forum and the basilica that towered over it were places where discussions were held and important decisions made, perhaps regarding the neighboring Berber tribes, whom the Romans never managed to suppress. In the Forum was a beautiful temple that had been built to imitate the Capitol in Rome. Leading up to it was this flight of 13 steps, to which the term monumental could well be applied, given the relatively small dimensions of the temple itself, just 36 feet long and 26 feet wide. Like the Capitol in Rome, the temple was dedicated to the Capitoline Trinity of gods, Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva, to whom senators might have prayed for assistance in their political careers. Initially, it was the center of the city of Volubilis, with its well-preserved public buildings, that attracted the attention of archaeologists. Subsequently, however, the outlying areas were to yield some interesting finds. All of the houses in Volubilis date from the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD. The House of the Ephebus, which takes its name from the discovery here of this wonderful bronze statue of a young man, was owned by a wealthy olive grower. Here he would hold lavish parties and banquets, perhaps to promote his public image. This is the marvelous House of Columns, with its circular impluvium. In this house, known as the House of Orpheus, we find a pool decorated with exquisite mosaics. The luxurious House of the Horseman, like most of the local residences, was filled with bronze statues, which are now kept in the museum in Rabat, the capital of Morocco. However, the most opulent and important house in the city was undoubtedly the House of Venus. It contains some of the most beautiful mosaics found in all of northern Africa. A chariot drawn by geese, Diana bathing, surprised by Actaeon, and Bacchus and the Four Seasons. These two bronze busts were also found inside the house. One, with its characteristic Roman features, portrays Cato the Younger, while the other, of unmistakable African origin, is the cultured Numidian king, Juba II. These two figures bear witness to the racial mix that flourished in North Africa and to the civilizations that resulted from it. Perhaps more than any other city, Volubilis serves as one of the finest examples of Rome's integration of African lands. The city prospered under its conquerors. It took the best Rome had to offer and made it its own. In this case, you might say, to the loser went the spoils.